Many see the moment when these new immigrants step onto the tarmac here at Ben Gurion Airport as the time when the words of the Bible written thousands of years ago come to life.
Ezekiel's ancient prophecy is no longer just a passage in Scripture. It's becoming a powerful reality. What was once seen as a distant, symbolic vision is now unfolding in real time.
You're humbled by meeting incredible individuals who are making such a leap of faith.
The return of the Jewish people to their homeland goes far beyond politics or history. It echoes a divine narrative foretold thousands of years ago. As events align with Ezekiel's words, many are beginning to ask, are we witnessing prophecy fulfilled? Let's explore the deeper meaning behind this unfolding story. Back to the beginning. In just the past 10 years, more than 250,000 Jews have returned to Israel. These aren't just relocations, they are the living fulfillment of a promise made thousands of years ago.
Yet the Jewish people have longed to return to this land for thousands of years.
From distant corners of the world, India, Ethiopia, Russia, and more, Jewish communities are coming back to a land many of their ancestors never even saw. It's a migration unlike anything in modern history. And this isn't just politics or paperwork, it's a prophecy, alive and moving. Entire groups, like the tribe of Manasseh, scattered for over 2,700 years since the Assyrian exile, are now returning. Ethiopian Jews, known as the Falash Mura, have waited generations for the doors to open. And now, those doors are swinging wide. What's happening isn't random. Prophets like Ezekiel spoke about this centuries ago. They saw a time when the scattered tribes would come home.
In the early morning, 130 Ukrainian Jews landed in Tel Aviv to begin a new life.
And now that time is unfolding right in front of us. This mass return is a message, a divine alert that something bigger is on the horizon. To understand why this matters so much, we need to rewind. Over 4,000 years ago, a man named Abraham lived a quiet life in a place he knew, surrounded by people he trusted. Then, God told him to leave it all behind and go to a land that hadn't even been revealed yet. No plan, no address, just a promise. And Abraham followed. That decision changed everything. God made a covenant with him, one that would stretch far beyond his lifetime. Abraham would become the father of a great nation. That promise was passed to his son Isaac, then to his grandson Jacob. And Jacob, after wrestling with an angel, received a new name, Israel. His 12 sons became the heads of 12 tribes. These tribes weren't just family lines. They were the foundation of an entire nation. But things weren't smooth. Eventually, famine pushed them into Egypt, where they were welcomed at first, but generations later, they became slaves. For centuries, the Israelites lived under heavy oppression. Their cries rose to heaven, and God responded. He raised Moses, a man who didn't think he was fit to lead. But Moses became the one who would confront Pharaoh, perform miracles, and part the Red Sea. Under Moses, they walked out of bondage and into the wilderness, free, but still searching. At Mount Sinai, something important happened. God gave them the law. These weren't just rules. They were a blueprint for identity, a framework for living in relationship with God. The law was about worship, justice, and community. It was a covenant written not just on tablets, but on the hearts of a people meant to be different. Even when they faltered, and they often did, God didn't walk away. Through every rebellion, every misstep, he stayed with them. When Moses died, Joshua took over. It was his job to finally lead the Israelites into the land God had promised. Canaan wasn't empty. It came with enemies, battles, and hardship. But this was the land their ancestors had been promised. Their purpose in this land wasn't just survival. It was to worship, to obey, and to be a beacon to the nations around them. Then came the Golden Era. King David rose from shepherd to warrior to king. He united the 12 tribes into one nation and established Jerusalem as its heart. Under his leadership, Israel not only survived, it flourished. David wasn't perfect, but he was devoted. And through him, God promised something even greater, a kingdom that would last forever. The fall begins. Under David's rule, Israel rises to power, but David's true legacy goes beyond war and conquest. His heart is set on building a temple for God, a permanent home for worship in Jerusalem. Though he isn't the one to complete it, he lays out the plans and prepares the way. That responsibility falls to his son Solomon. Solomon steps into leadership with wisdom that becomes legendary. His reign brings peace, prosperity, and wealth. Under him, Israel reaches its cultural and spiritual peak. The temple is built, grand and sacred, standing at the center of Jerusalem. The city itself becomes more than a capital. It becomes a symbol of Israel's identity and God's presence among the people. But no golden age lasts forever. After Solomon's death, cracks begin to form. The kingdom splits in two. 10 tribes break off to form the northern kingdom, Israel. The remaining 2, Judah and Benjamin, stay in the south, forming the kingdom of Judah. What had once been a united people now becomes 2 rival nations. The divide isn't just political, it's spiritual. The northern kingdom falls into idol worship, turning its back on everything that had once set it apart.
A growing number of Jews are returning to Israel. It's part of a fulfillment of prophecy spoken in the Bible.
Warnings go ignored, and the consequences are devastating. In 722, before the Common Era, the Assyrian Empire invaded. The northern tribes are defeated, scattered and absorbed into surrounding nations. Their identity disappears into history, and to this day, their fate remains a mystery. The southern kingdom holds on for a while longer, but even Judah can't outrun its own corruption. In 586, before the Common Era, Babylon struck. Jerusalem is conquered, the temple is destroyed, and thousands are taken into exile. What once stood as a thriving nation lies in ruins. A once proud people are now captives in a foreign land. It would have been easy to believe the story ended there, but even in exile, the prophets speak. Ezekiel, one of the most vivid voices of the time, has a vision. He sees a valley filled with dry bones, lifeless, forgotten. But then, in his vision, the bones begin to rattle. They come together, flesh returns to them, breath fills their lungs. It's a vision of national resurrection, a scattered people brought back from the dead. The message is clear. God has not abandoned his promise. The people may be broken, but the covenant is not. That promise begins to flicker again when Cyrus, the king of Persia, allows the exiles to return. The temple is rebuilt, not as grand as before, but enough to rekindle faith and identity. Still, Israel is no longer independent. They remain under foreign control. The people are back, but the nation is not restored. It's not the fulfillment of the promise, it's a shadow of it. A reminder that something greater is still to come. A true return, a full restoration, and the wait isn't over. In the 70 Common Era, the unthinkable happened. The Romans destroyed the Second Temple, the heart of Jewish worship and identity. Jerusalem burns, and with it, the last physical connection to a sovereign Jewish homeland. The people are scattered. Again. This is the beginning of the Great Diaspora. For nearly 2,000 years, the Jewish people would be without a nation, wandering the world, holding on to something that no longer seemed possible. But they never forget. The promises spoken by the prophets, the dream of return, stay alive. It's not just history, it's personal. In every generation, Jewish families pass down the same hope. One day, they will return to the land of Israel. Across centuries, Jews spread out through Europe, North Africa, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. They build communities, start families, and try to hold on to their traditions. But almost everywhere they go, they face resistance. Not just cultural distance, but active persecution. They're pushed out of kingdoms, crammed into ghettos, blamed for disasters, and brutalized in pogroms. Entire towns are burned. Jewish neighborhoods are attacked without warning. They live under fear and laws designed to humiliate and exclude them. But through it all, the hope never breaks. It gets quieter. It hides in whispered prayers, Sabbath songs, and old stories. But it survives. The darkest hour. Then comes the 20th century, and with it, the Holocaust. 6 million Jews are murdered by the Nazi regime. Whole families vanish, Cities that once held generations of Jewish life are emptied out in months. The horror is so deep, so calculated, that the world will never be the same again. But even in death camps and ghettos, faith flickers. People still sing, still pray, still believe that this can't be the end. For many, the Holocaust doesn't destroy the dream of return, it strengthens it. If survival is possible after this, then anything is. Then something extraordinary happens. In 1948, after centuries of longing and decades of political struggle, the State of Israel was born. Jews around the world witnessed what had seemed impossible. A modern Jewish state rises in the very land that was once their home. This isn't just a new country. It's a return, a reawakening of identity, a chapter they were told would never be written. Ezekiel's words suddenly feel alive again. God's promise to gather his people from the nations and bring them back isn't just scripture anymore. It's happening. This moment isn't driven by politics alone. For many Jews, this is divine movement, a prophecy unfolding in real time. Behind the formation of the state is a movement that had been building for years, Zionism. But this is something deeper. Zionism believes that the Jewish people have a historic and spiritual connection to the land of Israel. It sees the return not as a new idea, but as a return to something ancient, a fulfillment of something sacred. And once the gates open, they don't close. Jews begin arriving from all corners of the world: Europe, North Africa, the Americas, Yemen, Iraq, Ethiopia. They come by ship, by plane, sometimes by foot. Some escape war, some flee poverty, others just want to go home. The story of the Jewish people returning to Israel becomes a global reality. Millions come, and they're not just building a country, they're stitching back together something that was almost lost forever. The return of the Jewish people to their homeland is about fulfillment, about seeing with your own eyes that ancient promises weren't forgotten. For generations, the Jewish people carried a dream they never let go of, and today, that dream is unfolding in real time. What was once only spoken in prayers and whispered across centuries is now happening on the ground. The return is visible, it's tangible, but more than that, it's a sign that God remained faithful, a sign that the words of the prophets weren't just hopeful poetry, but blueprints for the future. Even now, in the present day, the return isn't over. It's still moving forward. It's not locked in the past, tucked away in history books. It's active. The return continues to unfold, just as it was written thousands of years ago. And these stories, whether about remote tribes or modern cities, all point in the same direction. Prophecies are coming true. Take the tribe of Manasseh. More than 2,700 years ago, the Assyrians invaded the northern kingdom of Israel and exiled 10 of its tribes. They vanished into history, or so it seemed. Among them was the tribe of Manasseh, which scattered across Asia and eventually settled in parts of India. For generations, they lived far from the land of their ancestors, cut off from the rest of the Jewish world. And yet, they held on. They preserved their customs, their Sabbath, their kosher practices, their stories. Then, in modern times, something unexpected began to happen. Thousands of their descendants, known today as Bnei Manasseh, started returning to Israel. They came from villages in northeast India, carrying prayers passed down for generations. Their return closed a 27th-century gap. It didn't just feel symbolic. It felt prophetic. Something long believed lost was now restored. It was living proof that exile wasn't the end of the story. The French Connection. The return isn't just coming from forgotten tribes or remote lands. It's also happening in the middle of modern Europe. In recent years, France has seen a wave of Jewish emigration to Israel.
Nearly 50 Jewish immigrants recently moved from France to Israel.
And it's not slowing down. In 2021 alone, Jewish immigration from France surged by 137%. Over 6,000 new immigration files were opened in a single year. This wasn't just a spiritual movement. It was a response to rising anti-Semitism, growing insecurity, and a longing for home. Jews in France began to realize that Israel wasn't just a dream, it was a real option, and for many, it became a necessary one. The prophecy of return was no longer only about distant history, it was being shaped by real-world events, right now, in our lifetime. Another story of return comes from the highlands of Ethiopia. There, for centuries, lived a community known as the Beta Israel, Ethiopian Jews who traced their ancestry back to ancient Israel. Cut off from the rest of the Jewish world, they still kept their traditions alive. They observed the Sabbath, they followed Jewish dietary laws, they circumcised their sons, and even when missionaries and government forces tried to convert or silence them, they held on. In 1991, that determination finally met its moment. In a massive airlift called Operation Solomon, Israel flew over 14,000 Ethiopian Jews to safety in just 36 hours. The skies were filled with planes carrying not just passengers, but prophecy. It was one of the largest and fastest humanitarian airlifts in history. Today, over 75,000 Ethiopian Jews live in Israel, and that number has grown to more than 150,000 when you include their children. It's not just a rescue story, it's a return story, one that adds another layer to the ongoing fulfillment of something much bigger than politics or policy. Their return is more than just a chapter in a history book. It's a living reminder of resilience, of faith that refused to fade, and of ancient words coming true. These aren't just stories of people moving countries, they're prophecies unfolding. Each person stepping off a plane in Tel Aviv or kissing the ground in Jerusalem is walking straight into a promise made thousands of years ago. Some faced unbelievable hardship, cultural disconnection, and even discrimination. And yet, despite everything, many of them have not only integrated, but thrived. The Ethiopian Jewish community is one example, preserving traditions for centuries while being cut off from the global Jewish world. Their journey back has not been easy, but it has been sacred. One of the most emotional chapters in this modern-day return came during Operation Zur Israel. In this dramatic airlift, over 300 Ethiopian Jews were flown to Israel in a moment charged with meaning. As the planes touched down, the atmosphere was electric. Some dropped to their knees and kissed the ground. Others lifted the shofar to their lips and sounded it in celebration. And many cried because the promise that had been passed down through generations had finally come true. This wasn't just a flight, it was a full circle moment. People who had carried their faith in exile were finally stepping back into the land they had only known through prayers and stories. It wasn't symbolic, it was real, and it was happening now. From the ashes of war. In recent years, the return hasn't slowed. When war broke out in Ukraine, over 130 Ukrainian Jews made their way to Israel, fleeing violence, chaos, and instability. These were people who, in a moment of crisis, reached for something bigger than politics or paperwork. They reached for home. Their journey was supported by both Jewish and Christian organizations, a rare example of unity across faiths in helping fulfill something deeply prophetic. The words of Isaiah come to life here. God promised to bring his people from the east and gather them from the west. That verse isn't just poetry anymore. It's logistics, it's visas, it's passports and airlifts, and it's all happening in real time. Even in places where Jews have found freedom and comfort, the pull of Israel is strong. From North America, thousands are quietly packing their bags, not out of fear, but out of purpose. On one special flight, 2,000 Jews from the US and Canada arrived in Israel. They were doctors, community leaders, soldiers, and teachers, each one stepping into a role not just in society, but in prophecy. But the story doesn't stop with one nation or one region. This return is global. Jews are coming home from Latin America, Europe, Africa, Asia, every continent. Each community brings its own languages, food, music, and traditions, but they're all heading to the same place, answering the same call. It's a return that stretches the imagination, because it's not just about logistics, it's about prophecy. This is the blueprint written in Scripture, slowly becoming visible, one flight at a time. Look at Ezekiel 37, where God declares that he will take the children of Israel from among the nations and bring them back to their own land. He promises that they will no longer be two nations, no longer divided into rival kingdoms. That wasn't just a vision, it was a clear statement of what would one day happen. And now, as Jews return from around the world, we see it starting to take shape. The unity God described is beginning to materialize not as an abstract idea, but as a population of people with shared purpose, returning to the same soil after centuries apart. Isaiah 11:12 says it plainly. God will gather his people from the four corners of the earth. Today, that gathering is visible. Jews from across Europe, North Africa, Asia, the Americas, they're returning. They're not just coming back physically, they're reconnecting spiritually. The prophecy wasn't just about geography, it was about identity, faith, belonging. It was about being whole again. Each arrival isn't just one more statistic, it's one more confirmation that the promises made in Scripture are more than ancient words. They're happening now, with passports, plane tickets, and hearts full of expectation. The book of Revelation gives us a much bigger picture, one that stretches beyond borders and timelines. In Revelation 7:4-8, we read about 144,000 people sealed from the 12 tribes of Israel. That number might feel unusual or symbolic at first, but the text doesn't treat it like an idea. It names each tribe: Judah, Reuben, Gad, Asher. These aren't metaphors. These are people, real tribes with real history. What's happening here is more than a reunion. It's a moment of preparation. Before judgment begins, Scripture says the 12 tribes will be restored. The 144,000 aren't just part of this return. They're front and center in the final act of the story. Their role will be active. They're not bystanders. They're going to go out into the world during a time of global shaking, sharing the truth of the gospel with a world that's running out of time. So when we talk about the Jewish people returning to Israel, it's not just about reclaiming a homeland. It's about prophecy stepping into motion. Every return is a reminder. There's been a lot of confusion about the 144,000. Some groups, like the Jehovah's Witnesses, insist this number is symbolic, claiming it points to a special spiritual class of believers, not tied to Israel by blood or tribe. But if you actually read the verses, the Bible doesn't leave room for that kind of interpretation. It literally lists the tribes. They're not stand-ins, they're the actual sons of Jacob: Judah, Reuben, Naphtali, and the rest. The text goes out of its way to show these are literal people with a literal lineage. Then there are the Seventh-day Adventists, who say the 144,000 represent Sabbath keepers. Again, that idea just isn't there in the verses. It's an interpretation that doesn't match what's written. The Bible is clear. These people are descendants of Israel. It doesn't say they represent an idea. It says they belong to tribes that were scattered for thousands of years and are now being brought back together. If the names are literal, the people are too. And if the people are literal, then so is their role in the end times. They're not just another group mentioned in passing, they're a sign. They're proof that what God promised, He's actually doing. Even after generations of disobedience, even after Israel turned away from their Messiah, God never turned away from them. That's not just a nice thought. It's a clear, consistent message in Scripture. In Romans chapters 9-11, Paul makes it very clear God's promises to Israel still stand. They haven't expired. They weren't cancelled. They are still in motion because God's faithfulness doesn't depend on human response. His covenant wasn't built on Israel's perfection. It was built on his own character. Paul reminded early believers that God's covenant with Israel is irrevocable. No amount of failure can undo it. And today, the return of the Jewish people to their land is physical proof. It's not just politics or migration. It's a visible sign that God's promises are active. The land they return to is the same land promised to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And their return is part of something bigger than any government or headline. It's a continuation of a divine promise that has never been broken. Every time a Jewish family returns to Israel, it's not just a relocation. It's another sentence in a story God started thousands of years ago. It's not about maps or borders. It's about trust, divine trust. This isn't God reacting to events. It's God leading them. These returns are not random. They're rooted in prophecy. They echo the covenant made with the patriarchs, a covenant that was never conditional. God didn't say he would keep his promise only if Israel got everything right. He said he would keep his word because he is who he is, faithful, unchanging, and bound to the truth of his own nature. What we're seeing today, in real time, is that covenant still in effect. The return of the Jews to Israel is more than history in motion. It's theology in action. It's a living testimony that the God of the Bible does not forget what he said. He keeps his word, down to every detail. It's easy to mistake this global return for a political issue, but that misses the point entirely. This is not about national policy. This is a prophecy unfolding right in front of us. Every airplane landing in Tel Aviv, every passport stamped, every step taken on the soil of Israel by someone from the Jewish diaspora. None of that is coincidence. It's all tied to promises made thousands of years ago. And now those promises are visibly playing out. This is also why it matters how we interpret what's happening. Some people see it as a geopolitical development. Others brush it off as a cultural movement. But from a biblical perspective, it's neither. It's God working, openly and precisely. The prophets said Israel would be scattered, and they were. The prophets said Israel would return, and now they are. That's not symbolism. That's reality. The covenant still stands. It's one of the most unshakable truths in the entire Bible. God's covenant with Israel still stands. It was never cancelled, never paused, never forgotten. And despite everything that's happened, exile, rebellion, dispersion, persecution, God has not abandoned the promise he made to Abraham. What he said thousands of years ago still echoes through history, untouched by time. When God made his covenant with Abraham in Genesis 15, he didn't just offer blessings, he sealed it with a promise that carried eternal weight. He declared that Abraham's descendants would inherit the land, become a great nation, and be a blessing to the world. And this wasn't a contract that depended on Israel's behavior, it was a one-sided, divine commitment. God put himself on the line, not Israel. Even when Israel turned away, even when they worshipped idols, even when they rejected the prophets and finally rejected their own Messiah, God still held on to his promise. In Deuteronomy 30, long before Israel ever entered the land, God already spoke of their future disobedience and scattering, but he also promised that he would bring them back. He knew the road would be rocky, and he planned restoration anyway. Paul makes this completely clear in Romans 11. He writes that even though Israel stumbled, they didn't fall beyond recovery. He described them as branches temporarily broken off but not discarded. He said God's gifts and his calling are irrevocable. That means the promises made to Israel are not going anywhere. They are permanent. This is why the modern return of the Jewish people to Israel is so much more than a political moment or a cultural revival. It's a visible confirmation that God meant every word. Every flight that lands in Israel, every person who steps onto that soil, every community rebuilt, it all points back to the same truth. The covenant still holds. Think about this. What other ancient people group has been scattered across the world for over 2,000 years, endured genocide, discrimination, and forced assimilation, and yet still exists, still speaks their original language, and is now returning to the same land their ancestors walked? This isn't random. This isn't luck. This is a covenant unfolding, and it's not just about land, it's about identity. The Jewish people returning to Israel are not just reclaiming geography, they are stepping back into a role God reserved for them from the beginning. They are still his chosen people. And whether the world recognizes it or not, God's hand is guiding them back into place for a purpose that is bigger than borders. There's also something deeply personal in all of this. If God can keep a 4,000-year-old promise to an imperfect nation through centuries of chaos and rebellion, then it proves something crucial. God does not break his word. Not to Israel, not to anyone. His covenant is solid. His faithfulness is not built on feelings or current events. It's built on his nature. This matters for more than just prophecy. It affects how we understand God's character. If he kept his word to Israel, he will keep his word to you. If he didn't abandon them, He won't abandon anyone who belongs to him. His loyalty to Israel is a mirror of his loyalty to all his people. So when we say the covenant still stands, we're not talking about something abstract. We're talking about something concrete. Real people, real land, real history, real prophecy, and an unshakable God who still honors what he said just as powerfully now as he did then. Israel's return isn't just a fulfillment of ancient verses. It's a living, breathing display of God's eternal loyalty. It proves the covenant never expired. It proves he's still writing the story. God's covenant with Israel is not something from the past. It's still in place today. Each return to the land, each step that fulfills prophecy, shows that his promises remain in effect. Even after long periods of struggle and waiting, the plan is still moving forward. If the covenant is still active, what does that mean for the world right now? Let us know your thoughts.